Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. I'm joined by an amazing guest, Victoria Sardain, who has over a decade of experience in wellness and hospitality, with 7 years as a wellness hospitality consultant. She founded Teiah Hospitality to help leading hotel brands and property developers create wellness-driven guest experiences that seamlessly align with their brand. With a background in international hospitality management for the Ecole Hôtelière de Lausanne. Her passion for wellness and creative business solutions enables businesses to harness the power of wellness. Thank you, Victoria, for joining today. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So let's get into the episode. My first question for you for the podcast, for the interview questions of the podcast is have your certification in yoga, plant-based nutrition, life coaching, and personal training influence your approach to hospitality? And if so, how?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually started by studying in hospitality management in Lausanne in Switzerland. And while I was there, I was interested in hospitality and I've always have been, especially when it comes to events, when it comes to hosting. I loved it all. But I really found that to me, this growing, let's say, hobby at the beginning grew more and more into a really strong passion. And it was everything to do with wellness. It was nutrition, it was exercise, it was mindfulness, it was all of it. And I was trying to find a way to kind of combine the two to some extent, but especially to find a way to be able to explore my passion even more. And that's when I got additional certifications in basically every field within well-being. And at the time, I didn't necessarily know how the two would integrate. I didn't even know if it would be possible for the two to integrate, but all I knew was that I was studying at a very high level school in Switzerland, so I obviously didn't want to let go of my degree, but I wanted to find a way to learn more and to get more expertise within the space within wellness. So naturally, then having both the degree in international hospitality management and then having accrued many different certifications and having studied a lot on the side in all the different elements of wellness allowed me to kind of create this really interesting combination, which I realized was quite lacking. Wasn't a lot on offer in the market with that specific combination. And that's what allowed me to then get started initially with wellness hospitality consulting and then ultimately launch Teiah Hospitality.
That's awesome to hear. And I know that, you're doing a lot of things. And from my audience that probably thinks that you're only certified in these areas and they don't know exactly like who you are as a person because you also how you got to the stage. You did work different jobs like as a business development manager, guest relations, or as a sales representative. Working all these jobs and all these, roles, how has it helped you acquire the skills that you have today?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there's a lot of different roles, but ultimately, I've never actually had a corporate job. I started my business immediately out of university. So for me, I knew from the get-go that I wanted to go into entrepreneurship. At the end of university, everyone was going down the more corporate route, and I just knew it wasn't for me. I knew that there's something within me, it just doesn't sit quite right, just doesn't fit. Thankfully, I was at the time working already as a personal trainer. So I had personal training clients. I was working in group fitness. So I had that side of things. So I thought, what, let's take a couple months off. I'm not going to jump into things. I'm just going to continue with this until I kind of understand in what realm I would want to start my own business. And then, interestingly enough, the boutique fitness studio I was working in, they asked if I would help them with business development. So if I would help to expand their current studio into either a franchise or expand into a chain. And so I actually joined as a consultant in business development management. And all the other roles that you had mentioned, those are all consulting roles. So I immediately from the get-go had my own business that I was then providing consulting services. And that's what allowed me, I think, to grow relatively quickly in a certain way. a lot of people who go down the entrepreneurship route first start with the very corporate route, and you need to figure out how to work in a business before you start a business. And I completely understand that way of doing things. I guess my approach was always, if my end goal is to start a business, why don't I just do it now while I'm young and I have no responsibilities, and I can just make mistakes and learn as I go, and won't that be a faster way to get there? And I don't know if that was the best way to do it, to be honest, but I'm happy with how it worked out. And, I don't fully know if I would do it the same way, but I don't know if I would do it differently either. I don't know if that's, let's say, a helpful question for me to ask myself. I think it's always better to think, look, I've done it this way for now. For now, it's allowed me to grow fast. It's allowed me to learn a lot. And yeah, being able to work within lots of different companies more as a independent consultant, I think has allowed me to have more of an external view rather than being kind of stuck in the corporate politics that I find tends to slow things down quite a bit.
When you realized that you were gonna go your own path and you're gonna carve your own destiny, did you face any like challenges or like self-doubt that you had to overcome?
Oh, of course. I mean, if you're starting a business at 22, I mean, it's only self-doubt, right? I think if you don't have any self-doubt, then there's probably an issue there. So yeah, obviously faced a lot of self-doubt. I mean, I doubted even what I was doing a lot. Thankfully, I did have friends who were in the entrepreneurial route, that I was able to talk to, so that helped a lot. Um, I've never been afraid of doing my own thing, to be honest with you. So I do think that probably helped. When I was in university, everyone was out, drinking and partying, and I was the one waking up at 5 a.m. and going to the gym before lectures. So I was kind of used to just being the odd one out that just does things differently, and that never really bothered me. I always kept in mind that if you want things that other people don't have, you need to do the things that people won't do. So that was never a fear of mine to be different, I guess. But I did constantly, look around and say, wow, X years after university, this person now has this amazing role, and they're probably set for life, and their insurance is paid for, and they get a car, and they get housing, and they get I don't know what. And I was there, trying to do my own accounting and slogging my way through, thinking I definitely haven't made things easy for myself. Um, but I think, there's always a reason why you do things. And I think that the reason why I did things the way that I did is valid, and it brought me the kind of life that I have now, which I love and wouldn't change for anything. So I think those doubts will always come up, whichever route you take. You go down the corporate route in your first job, those doubts will still come up. So I think in the end, it's just learning how to speak with yourself and your mind, knowing how to deal with those doubts, and knowing how to, kind of like feel the fear, but do it anyways. It's just you feel the doubt and you just continue doing the best you can and put one foot forward after the other. And in the end, like hindsight is 2020. You'll always look back and realize why you did things the way you did.
I think right there, what you said and you described how you were the odd one out. I think it's really commendable. Not just going back into that previous point that I said, but in terms of, like you said, you're 22 years old, you have all this ambition, you have the goals, and 2024 with more of a focus on consistency and variety and health focused training. Can you explain how this shift in focus impacted your approach to wellness and your goals? Like kind of expanding on your mindset, which I think is something that you've displayed, and I really, you know, appreciate that the way that you see things, you see it differently, and you want to make a mark in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything comes down to mindset. I think that the core of that is more just you have to learn how to work with yourself. You have to understand yourself. And, I've always said that personal development is at the core of anything that you do with business. And that's always what I've kept at the forefront of my mind. And naturally, I also went down the life coaching route and studied that. And I studied a lot, in terms of psychology and whatnot. So it's something that interests me a lot. But I think whether it is or not, I think the mindset is always at the forefront of everything you do. So I always set myself personal goals in every area of life, right? Whether it be nutrition, whether it be training, whether it be recovery, whether it be finances or business, friends, family, relationship, whatever it is. And so then I kind of thought, okay, I see where this is going. I'm, too much in this like go, go, go mindset, which was then having a negative impact. And therefore, that's why then in 2024, I was like, all right, no fitness goals at all. I'm just going to focus on just consistent training. But that's just one tiny 1%, let's say, of the bigger message, which is just understand yourself. When things don't go right, don't take it as a area of frustration. Take it as an area of learning, understanding, okay, something didn't go as it should, or something didn't go as planned, or didn't go as I thought it might. That's my opportunity to then step back, reassess, why did that happen? What's going on? Okay, how can I take a different approach? And I think whether that's in fitness, whether that's in your work, whether it's in your relationships, whatever it is, I mean, that's kind of the approach that I think is most useful.
I agree. I think self-awareness is really important no matter what line you're in and what you're trying to achieve. And like I mentioned, not only whether it's training or hospitality, you also, like myself, have a podcast. And the Victoria Sardain podcast, for my audience who aren't familiar with it, or I'm pretty sure they are pretty familiar with it, which you started in July of 2024. So not too long back, but I've checked out the videos and it's amazing. So everyone who's watching this, I recommend you go to Victoria's podcast and tune in. There's some interesting and great stuff there. Considering your various roles and everything that you're doing and so much that's going on in your life, why'd you start a podcast and what do you hope to inspire through it?
Yeah, so I actually started my podcast a long time before that. I started it in 2020 during COVID, I believe. Yeah, 2020. And actually, but it was a different format. So I kind of brought in a new format in 2024. So you're right that it kind of relaunched, let's say, in 2024, but I had already had it since 2020. And the idea behind it, actually, it's interesting because prior to COVID, I had consulting clients. So I had a consulting business. I had one-on-one personal training clients. I was teaching in group fitness, and I'd also, in the meantime, started a wellness events business where we were doing pop-up events in interesting locations every month with panel of speakers and collaboration with brands and activities, etc. So I kind of had those four streams of income, and then COVID hit, and naturally, I was in events, group fitness and consulting within hospitality. So obviously everything was completely put on pause. And so I found myself, with no streams of income. And I think that was the first time where I looked around at people who, COVID, yeah, sure, they had to stay home, but it didn't really have that profound of an impact. Where for me, I had lost all four businesses that I had built in the past couple of years. And I literally felt like everything is just taken out of my hands. And I remember that was the first time where I did have that little feeling of like, God, wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if salary didn't change and they just said, all right, we'll stay at home and just work online? Like, wouldn't that be nice? But I remember telling myself as well in that moment, I will turn this into an opportunity. I always say this, I've said this in a million different interviews before, but at the time I was reading this book about, it's like about sales, I think, something like that. And in the book, he said there were more millionaires made during the Great Depression than any other time in history. And for me, that was such a inspiration, because it does make you realize that there's always an opportunity somewhere. During the Great Depression, which was the worst time in economical history, that was the time where there were the most millionaires that were made. That is because for 99% of the population, it was a catastrophe. But for 1% that decided to turn it into an opportunity, it became an opportunity. And I remember with that in mind, I told myself, I will turn this into an opportunity. And I know that sounds very long-winded answer, but I'm getting there. And I told myself, since I'm very interested in personal development, this is my opportunity to study life coaching online, and then I can launch an online life coaching business, because I need to find another way to bring in income. I need to find a way to serve people based on what it is that they need. Everyone's sat at home and they're miserable. So this is a great opportunity. And at the same time, I decided that I would start my podcast. So the first iteration of my podcast was very much based on personal development. It was exploring topics such as confidence, self-doubt, how to allow yourself to rest when you need to, or exploring topics such as, successful goal setting. I mean, going everything from the most, let's say, basic or surface level practical side of coaching to the most deep discussions around more on like psychology and philosophy. So that was the first iteration of the podcast. It was really 20-30 minute episodes by myself, simply exploring different topics. And the main utilization for that podcast was to, first of all, obviously attract new coaching clients, but then also to use it as a resource that I would work with my current coaching clients. So we'd have a coaching session of about an hour. And then after the session, I'd have different podcast episodes that I had made that I could recommend them to listen to explore our discussion. So that was the first iteration of the podcast. Then after COVID ended and I moved to Thailand, I decided to pick back up my consulting. I really missed being in the business world. I missed meeting clients. I missed, being in a suit and having big discussions and strategy and having, let's say, a larger impact at scale rather than working one-on-one with somebody. So I picked back up consulting, and then it didn't necessarily make a huge amount of sense to continue with my podcast. So I decided to put it on pause for a little bit while I just reflect on what it is that I'm trying to achieve and what is this for. And I decided in 2024 to relaunch my podcast, but under a completely different format. So the format now is interviews with interesting people within wellness from every side of wellness. So in the podcast, we've had financial coach talking about financial wellness. We spoke obviously with like athletes and life coaches and nutritionists, naturopaths, spoke with even a stylist to talk about how the way that you dress and present yourself will have an impact on how you feel and your well-being and your goals and all of these kind of things. So the second iteration of the podcast is more focused on connecting with people, taking that opportunity to actually be able to sit down one-on-one with somebody, learn about them, and to explore wellness from many different angles. And the objective with the second iteration of the podcast is really to show that there's not just one way to implement well-being in your life. It's not just the answer to everybody is, eat spinach and meditate for 30 minutes a day. Maybe you don't like spinach and maybe meditation just doesn't do it for you. There's lots of different ways of doing about it or going about it. And there's lots of different avenues and directions you can take. So that's really hopefully what I want to inspire and put forth with the podcast.
I think that's absolutely inspirational, your podcast, whether it was the first iteration, second iteration, and the fact that you were bold enough to put yourself out there and your mindset again is commendable. The fact that you were able to analyze the situation and turn it into an opportunity is something that not many people really do. And the initiative is great, the first and the second iteration of the podcast. And like you mentioned, not everyone likes to do the same level of things in terms of wellness. Everyone keeps himself differently. And one form of wellness that you mentioned before is journaling. And you mentioned a bit about reading. How would you say that journaling and reading has helped impact your well-being and how you see
Yeah.
wellness?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Journaling for sure, especially with what you mentioned about self-awareness. I think journaling is how you improve your self-awareness. When you're in your head, you can kind of reflect about things, but the difference is when you're thinking, let's say you're feeling really low and you don't really know why, right? You can take some time to think about it and say, all right, why am I feeling low? But when you're thinking, you don't necessarily have to have the same depth of understanding, because you can sort of not finish a sentence in your mind, right? In your mind, you can kind of say like, oh, well, I don't know. When you're writing, you need to put words to it. It becomes a lot more real, and it makes you, let's say, face a situation, but it also makes you tie something such as a word to what it is that you're feeling. So it builds that self-awareness. So when it comes to journaling, it's really in terms of the benefit for me, it's really that self-awareness, but it's brought me to many different light bulb moments. It's really been a lot of the time catalysts in different phases of my life. When I think back about, well, yeah, I remember I was going through, struggling with something and then it got a lot better. Often it would be that moment of journaling that unlocks something. So I'm obviously a huge fan of it. I think it's amazing. I understand that at the beginning it can be a little bit difficult. There are guided journals that you can use. I usually just do free flow writing, and I don't do it every single day. I'm not super consistent. I usually do it if there's something going on. If I'm feeling either a bit anxious about something, or I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable about something, or I'm in a period of doubt or of worry, or maybe there's a big decision that I need to make, or whatever it is, that's when I turn to journaling. But I do think there can be benefits, obviously, in doing it as a daily practice. But I would say if you've never done it before and maybe the free flow version feels a little bit daunting, you can explore some of the guided versions. And I had, for example, on my podcast, Mo, who's the founder of the Happiness Planner. She's actually Bangkok based and it's a Bangkok based brand. And in the Happiness Planner, you basically choose a planner of your choice. So, for example, you can choose one on gratitude, you can choose one on confidence, you can choose one on grief or on whatever it is that you're going through, and then it guides you through daily journaling prompts. So, there's that option, but there's also probably many others on the market that you can explore. So, I would start with something maybe a bit more guided at the beginning if you're new to it. But I guess with the ambition ultimately of being able to do a free flow, because it'll really help you to build a bit more of a relationship with yourself.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Focusing more on TL hospitality, which was something that I touched upon in the introduction, but haven't really discussed about yet. There are four areas of expertise, which are hospitality, spa and medi-spa, F&B, and movement. How do you integrate these four areas to provide a well-rounded wellness experience?
Yeah, so we have these kind of four different areas of expertise, and in some of the projects we're working on, we might be integrating all of them, but on some of them we might not. So what the benefit of having those four different areas of expertise is, first of all, we have specialists within each of those teams that really have very in-depth knowledge, but it allows us to kind of play around with the scope of whatever project it is that we're dealing with to understand, do we need to be focusing on all four of those areas, maybe three of those areas, maybe two, maybe one. And it allows us to have that flexibility. So let's say that we're working with a existing luxury hotel, Center City, and they want to develop more wellness as part of their offering. While discussing with them, we'll understand a little bit, obviously. I mean, are they open to, adding a new build? Do they have those kind of resources? Are we looking just to make adaptations to what's already existing? Maybe we will discover that, look, they have a restaurant and we want to create a new wellness offering within the restaurant, but they also have, let's say, an empty space where we can focus on offering a, let's say, movement offering because they don't have a gym. Let's give this as a complete made up example. In that case, great. We'll be allocating the resources from our F&B team in order to work on more of an F&B style project, but then we'll also have our movement team working on developing a movement offering. And then naturally, obviously, there'll be crossovers between both. And maybe they might be open later on to actually, let's make some changes in the rooms, let's add some amenities. Then, more of the hospitality department would be focusing on, okay, if we're focusing on rooms, let's change the amenities in the bathroom in order to focus on, very organic. Maybe we're going to be changing the bed sheets to focus on organic cotton. Maybe we want to be adding in different interesting items that are going to support the guest wellness. And then maybe we want to create a package or a retreat out of it. So we can really play around with which elements do we want to include, which ones do we don't, based on the scope of the project. Obviously, if we're working with a property developer and we're building out a new wellness resort, all four of those elements will have to be present. But maybe say, oh, the F&B side, we've got that covered. We have somebody else who's taking care of it. Okay, great. Then let's just focus on the other one. So we can really play around with what areas are we focusing on based on what the project needs.
That sounds awesome. I love what you're doing and I love how flexible it is. Even though you have four areas of expertise, you're not really stuck on one area. You're flexible to what um, the customer wants and what is needed for the different projects. And kind of connecting all of it together. And we mentioned personal training business, coaching business. We have a podcast. We also have um, events business, which is the brunch club. And all of these things are kind of all over the map and all over the place. But in a way, I I assume that they all kind of connect with each other
Yeah.
in one way or another. How do these all come together to support the different clients you have?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't do personal training anymore. I don't teach group fitness or anything like that. So those are also things from the past in the way in which they connect now. I always say that I'm kind of I guess I'm more of a jack of all trades type of person, right? So I explored wellness in many different areas and I was myself integrated within the day-to-day operations, right? I was going one-to-one with a personal training client. I was teaching a yoga class. I was doing the business development of boutique fitness studio. I was studying nutrition. So for me as an individual, it allowed me to have this overarching knowledge. I know how things should run in a way that allows me now to have an agency that has a pretty large scope of offering. And I do have specialists because I'm not a qualified nutritionist. I study nutrition. I'm not a qualified nutritionist. Great. I have a nutritionist on the team who can help with that. I did personal training, but I wouldn't say that exercise science is my domain. I don't have a degree in exercise science. Therefore, I have somebody who's an expert in that who can help to create those kind of movement offerings. So by me having studied all those different things, I have allowed myself to then, let's say, have a very general understanding of how all these different areas should work, and then has allowed Teiah to have this kind of scope that then has built out these four different areas and then bring in the experts that have more specific knowledge in each of those areas. So your end saying is a bit all over the map in the sense that I've done a lot of things because I have a lot of points of interest. So I've dabbled in lots of different areas. In a way, it could have been a weakness because I was never fully focused on one thing. But in a way, it's also my strength because I kind of understand all of it. And I'll bring in the people who just do that one thing. But going back to knowing yourself, for me, I know myself. I know that I get bored very quickly. I need variety in my life. And the idea of having one sole point of interest and doing only one thing forever, not going to happen. But there's lots of people who love that. So great. I'll bring those people in who have that one area of passion and who are amazing at what they do in that one specific area. Perfect. I'll bring them in order to help us with that. But my strength is that kind of very overarching high level view of understanding, which having all those different, let's say, certifications and experience has allowed me. I hope that answers the question.
Awesome. That's a great way to end the interview section of the podcast. Thank you so much, Victoria, for your insights and your time.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
And to anyone here who's watching the podcast that is new, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Also, as I mentioned, Victoria has a channel, so I'll put the link in the description and be sure to check out her videos as well because it's amazing, like I said. And I'll see all of you for the next episode. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thanks so much.